The impact of the war with Iran on Ukraine, Trump, Israel, Ukraine, Iran, Putin, Xi, who is winning and who is in the dustbin of history, a short-term gain for Russia and China, and the long-term collapse of the axis of evil. Venezuela is no longer an ally of Russia and China, and Iran will not return. On the map, a friendly takeover of Cuba, pacification of Mexico, and cleansing of Lebanon and Syria, and the creation of a new Iran-Israel-Saudis coalition, which means 1 billion Saudi Arabs, signing the Abraham Accords with Iran, all the countries of the Persian Gulf, and an agreement on mutual defense and maintaining order between former enemies, who became allies thanks to one specific thing, thanks to the policy of Donald Trump. We will talk about all of this, and along the way there is a lot waiting for you. Amazing discoveries and messages. In the end, we promise to tie everything we've talked about into one astonishing result. So, let's begin. Imagine that the planet has 3 directors who are writing the scripts for the next 20 years. One is sitting in Washington, Donald Trump, the second in Moscow, Vladimir Putin, and the third in Beijing, Xi Jinping. There are 3 main fields between them, fields of battle. Ukraine, the Middle East with the war, that means the US, Israel, and the shadow of a future conflict around China and Taiwan. One war fuels another, a strike on Iran echoes in Kyiv, and a decision on Ukraine changes calculations in Beijing. In this video, we'll break down not only who outplayed whom, but more importantly, how these wars personally affect you and all of us. Prices, security, on the future of our children. In the first part, you will see why strikes on Iran are not just another war in the Middle East, but a turning point for the entire American strategy. In the middle, an unexpected connection, how the war with Iran affects Ukraine and Europe. And at the end, something that almost no one is talking about, how all of this could, in the long run, strengthen the United States and lead to a safer and even more just world for all of us. The upper union will raise Ukraine's rating as well as Kyiv's in order. Well, let's start with Trump and Iran. Trump 47 returns to the White House with the slogan, "We stop fighting for everyone else," and almost immediately the US together with Israel deliver powerful strikes against Iran. This is not the usual hunt for proxies, but a blow to the heart of the regime. Nuclear infrastructure, the military leadership elite. The US formally steps back from the role of the world's policeman, but shows that where we do intervene, the strike will be tough and precise. For Israel, this is a moment they've been waiting decades for. A country that has lived under the shadow of the Iranian bomb is finally seeing on their screens those very facilities burning, the ones that prime ministers and generals have talked about for years. At headquarters, they're flipping through satellite images of black craters instead of protected centrifuges. For the first time in a long while, there is a chance to imagine a future not under the constant fear of nuclear blackmail. Imagine a room at night. Trump, the Israeli prime minister, and several generals. On the table, a map of Iran covered with red markers, nuclear facilities, IRGC bases, residences of the elite. The thought of making a mistake hangs in the air. They won't forgive mistakes. The reputation of the US is at stake, as well as the security of Israel, and of course the trust of all their allies. The decision here isn't about a symbolic response, but about an attempt to rewrite the entire architecture of the region, to eliminate a threat that has been building up for decades, and at the same time create a new principle for the use of American power. Fewer endless wars, for an idea. More short, tough, pragmatic wars, operations. For Trump, this is a way to tell Americans, we're no longer fighting everywhere, but if we strike, then... and in such a way that we are respected. For Israel, it's a chance to push back the existential threat, at least for a generation. For the entire Middle East, it's the risk of a major war. Missiles targeting cities, strikes on US bases, outbreaks of hatred. With one hand, Trump makes America look stronger. With the other, he sets the region on fire. Again, hoping that he can control the fire. Something Carter and Brzezinski failed to do with Iran. And while the world watches the explosions over Iran, the war in Ukraine quietly disappears from the front pages. Let's move to another office, in Kyiv. On the table, there's a map of the front, cities, symbols of pain and resistance. The president is flying to the west again, asking for weapons and money again. But the rhetoric is changing. The words realistic peace are being heard more and more often. Concessions. Resources are not unlimited, and most importantly, concessions are expected not from Moscow, but from Kyiv. To give up part of the territory, to limit the army, to close this chapter, because a more urgent war has emerged. On one screen, there's a live broadcast from the Middle East, missiles, an emergency meeting of the Security Council. On the other screen, there's a tired Ukrainian leader and a carefully veiled message. We've already done a lot for you. Our society is tired, money isn't unlimited, and finally, as they say, the last straw. We have to make choices. At this moment, Ukraine turns from a symbol of the civilized world's fight for freedom into just another line in the budget, which, well, probably needs to be cut for the sake of other important things. Later in the video, we'll show the exact bill Europe will face for this, and why it will come not only to Brussels, but also to you, through prices, migration, and security. Now, a short pause for an important request. If you're watching this, you're already different from most people. You care. To avoid getting lost in the flow, hit the bell. That way, you won't miss the moments when the world is being reshaped again without explanation. And share this video with at least one person who usually says, "I'm not into politics. Politics doesn't interest me." It's exactly to him that we're trying to explain how just one strike on Iran changes things, like how much his mortgage will cost, the price of gas, and the safety of his children. He's not interested in politics, but this is what interests him. He doesn't get the connection. Let's return to the Kremlin. Late evening, the report is on Putin's desk. The US and Israel are striking Iran. Oil prices are rising. The story is already running on TV. The West has started another war. At the bottom, there's a small line. Attention, the US and Europe are shifting focus, and there's a growing demand for a realistic solution on Ukraine. For Putin, this line is golden. A war with Iran gives him several bonuses right away. It distracts the West from Ukraine, raises energy prices, brings in extra money for war and repression, allows for even deeper ties with Iran, and lets him get closer to China. At the same time, neither Putin nor Xi are actually ready to defend Tehran. In a direct confrontation with the US, Iran suddenly sees the limits of this friendship. It's a paradox. In the short term, Putin seems to be winning. More money, less attention to Ukraine. He is seen as an older brother figure for Iran and part of the global south. But strategically, Russia is getting more and more stuck in the role of China's junior partner, a raw materials appendage, without a say. The third director is China. Xi Jinping appears calm on the outside without making loud threats to liberate anyone. China quietly buys cheap oil from Russia and Iran, signs long-term contracts, and switches transactions to yuan. While the US is torn between Ukraine and Iran, Washington has fewer resources for the main challenge of the century, containing China. Xi looks at the map like a chess player. America is tied up, Europe is scared and fragmented, Russia is dependent, and Iran is on fire. So it's time to strengthen economic influence, secure resources, and get more and more countries used to the fact that important decisions are made not only in Washington but also in Beijing. And now we come to the key question which concerns you directly. Who wins strategically? Meaning, what kind of world will we and our children live in 10 or 20 years from now? At first glance, the United States with Trump looks like the tactical winner. Iran is weakened, Israel is protected, Russia and Iran are being exhausted, and China is not getting directly involved yet. If they manage to cement at least some acceptable peace regarding Ukraine, Washington will say, "We brought order without getting involved in all the wars at once." Israel gets a break from the nuclear threat. Putin gains time and money but loses strategic independence. China increases its influence and turns other people's wars into its own economic opportunity. But at the same time, the world faces new threats. The first doubt about the reliability of the US as an ally. If Ukraine is pushed toward painful concessions, every country asks itself, won't they do the same to us one day? Second, Russia is permanently stuck in the status of a pariah. dependent on Chinese loans and markets. Third, China, having reached critical mass, may at some point decide that it's time to resolve the Taiwan issue by force, and then the third battlefield will become a direct conflict between Beijing and Washington. Gentlemen, now comes the most interesting part, and here is the promised climax. How can the new U.S. strategy, despite all the risks, make the world safer in the long run and give Americans themselves a chance to renew their leadership? Trump, in essence, is refusing the role of the sole global policeman and is proposing a model of regional policemen. The U.S. is the main player in its own region and an arbiter who intervenes in other regions only where the vital interests of the U.S. itself are at stake. The burden shifts to allies and regional power centers. Europe must ensure its own security, the Middle East must balance threats on its own, and Asia should rely on Japan, India, South Korea, and perhaps Australia, not just on Washington. Simply put, the world is gradually being divided into zones of responsibility. In Europe, the U.S. says, either you build up your defense and become an independent center of power, or you risk ending up under Russia. The umbrella remains, but it's no longer free and not forever. In the Western Hemisphere, the renewed Monroe Doctrine is being strengthened. It's the main priority for the U.S. Here we guarantee security. This is our front yard, our backyard. And they're only ready to intervene far across the ocean in extreme cases. In Asia, the U.S. remains a key player, but they're pushing their allies to take on some of the risk and responsibility themselves. Increased defense budgets, joint missile defense systems, and a coalition resembling an informal NATO II. Why might such a world be safer for us? First, it makes regional players pay their own bills for security. They put everything on the shoulders of the American taxpayer. This means fewer endless wars for other people's interests and more resources within the U.S. for things that later affect the rest of the world. That is, technology, economy, infrastructure, the dollar. A strong domestic U.S. means less temptation to plug the holes of war and more opportunities to resolve conflicts economically and diplomatically. Secondly, is it possible to build a network? Regional security anchors, a strong Europe, and a stable Asia-Pacific bloc. With a more balanced Middle East, the U.S. will have fewer reasons to send troops into every conflict. This reduces the risk of an accidental major war between nuclear powers and gradually makes the international system less dependent on a single capital. Thirdly, multipolarity, with the right rules of the game, can give the world not only fewer conflicts, but also significantly more opportunities for development. When responsibility for order is shared among several centers, smaller countries gain room to maneuver, and the global economy has more sources of growth. And for you, no matter what passport you hold, there is less chance of waking up in a world where the fate of entire regions is decided in a single room, in a single hall, in a single bunker. Without regard for the consequences, yes, that's the ideal scenario, and there are plenty of risks, from the abuse of power by regional leaders to dangerous vacuums that China and Russia might fill. But in the long run, the idea of having fewer global policemen and more regional pillars gives a chance for renewal, not for the collapse of the system. And at the end of the video, we will add one more, most unexpected element, the element of hope. The Middle East. What used to be a constant fire will now become an element of hope. Imagine a completely different Middle East. Not a chain of endless wars, but an emerging center of stability. The regime in Iran is changing, and a leadership is coming to power that focuses not on exporting revolution and proxy wars, but on developing the economy and normal relations with its neighbors. Iran stops seeing Israel and the Arab monarchies as enemies. By definition, it starts counting money, not slogans. God grant that they count money, not slogans. Iran has a huge market, a young population, oil, gas, and transit between Asia and Europe. Israel has technology, an army, science, and startups. Syria and the Levant have geography, ports, and labor. Instead of the Iran versus Israel and Sunnis axis, a new axis of cooperation emerges. Iran, Syria, Israel, who are dragged along as slaves, slave neighbors. The region gets a chance to become an independent center of power, a regional superpower that is responsible for balance and order itself. What changes in such a scenario, and why is it important for you to understand this? Proxies, Hezbollah, Houthis, Hamas, and the like lose their meaning. Without the image of an eternal war with Israel and the U.S., networks like Hezbollah and Shiite militias lose both their funding and their missions. Some turn to politics, some disarm, and some become marginalized. Gaza and the West Bank stop being an eternal chessboard. With no existential Iranian threat, and with the new Iran interested in stability, there is a chance for a bigger deal. Economic aid, labor corridors, infrastructure. At the same time, a strong regional bloc puts pressure on both the Palestinian elites and the Israeli radicals, forcing them to move toward compromise. Lebanon stops being a hostage of Hezbollah in Syria, stops being a battlefield, and turns into a bridge and a corridor. Jordan and the moderate regimes not only get the role of a buffer, but also a real security umbrella. By the way, investments and tourism as well. For the world, this means fewer rockets hitting cities. Less chance that a local conflict will drag in NATO, Russia, or China. Less need to spend trillions on war and more on development. For the US and Europe, predictable energy flows and fewer migration crises. For Asia, stable trade routes. For ordinary people, there's less chance that another crisis in the Middle East will crash prices, currencies, and most importantly, security. Yes, it sounds almost fantastic compared to today's news, but it's important to understand that the world doesn't just have a scenario of chaos, but also a scenario of gradual movement toward a divided world. And here we return to our three directors. If we look not only at conflicts but at a 20-year horizon, the US, China, and Russia have not only contradictions but also common goals: to prevent a major war with each other, to maintain a functioning global economy, to limit terrorism and cyber chaos, to manage climate and technological risks, to prevent the emergence of new surprises, black holes like ISIS. This means that in the short term we compete with and undermine each other, but in the long term we are forced to cooperate. Maybe we don't even want to, but we're forced to agree on at least some basic common rules. Which side of the street to drive on? Otherwise we'll crash into each other on the very first day. On nuclear escalation, cyberspace, protection of critical infrastructure, and maritime routes. And it's important to take this duality from the video. Right now, the world feels like a collection of conflicts and competing blocks, but at the same time, another logic is emerging. Either these blocks will learn to agree on the rules or everyone will lose everything. And here, your personal stance, to be interested, to understand, to ask questions rather than to tune out, is also part of the game. So, to conclude, I have two questions for you. What do you want to hear more about? The future of Russia, Taiwan, the fate of Ukraine, US domestic politics, the role of China in your region? Write in the comments. This is where the next episodes come from. And second, how do you feel in this new world? Do you see only danger? Or have you started to see a chance that through this painful period we might come to a more stable system with shared responsibility and less dependence on a single, already tired global policeman? Thank you for watching until the end. What do you think? Don't stay silent. It's people like you who make up not a mythical collective West or collective East, but a real collective world. Real people with real destinies. As long as you keep asking questions and trying to understand, we all have a chance to influence what the next act of this scenario will be like and what role you personally will play in it. Goodbye, until we meet again.